All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Katya Wald. I'm the Executive Director here at the eForum. I want to welcome you to tonight's event. Just quickly wanted to go over the agenda. We are right now in the introduction, so you know where we are at the moment. From 5:40 to 5:45, we're going to have our presentation with Mark Gallagher. From 5:45 to 7, we will have a panel discussion, and then 6:30 to 7, we're going to do some try to just get everybody to introduce themselves, who they are, just because we want to make sure that we know who's on, and hopefully you guys can keep one another, and then we will. Nice event. Brooks. Hamilton Brooks has been with us as a sponsor for as long as I've been here, 10 years ago, about almost 7 years ago. That 3 years before the organization. We recently rebranded from the MIT Enterprise Forum to the eForum. Appreciate both over the years. A number of things here at the eForum. I just wanted to quickly go we have an application program and there we go. 22 we start last come up on January, and then we have another marketing session up on January 18th. Marketing crafting marketing and strategy. For tonight we have a group of speakers. So I'm talking to Solomon at Hamilton. Take it away, Mark.
Hey, well, thank you, Katya. And let me just ask, I see some people are having difficulties with the audio, and I did as well. So Katya, I'm not sure we heard your whole message, but could somebody let me know if I'm coming across clearly?
Loud and clear, Mark. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Okay,
Mark,
great.
you sound great.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Mark Solomon with the firm Hamilton Brooks Smith Reynolds. We're one of the sponsors of the eForum, and we appreciate Amy and Katya and everything you do for the eForum. This has been a great organization for our firm to be a sponsor over many years. So we very much appreciate the organization, to all the members, people who are in attendance this evening and have been in attendance in the past. So we appreciate being able to participate in this way. And so tonight we're going to have a discussion of Mark Gallagher. He's a brand expressionist with Black Coffee. Jennifer Devajian is the Chief Executive Officer for Criscott, and Matt Zacharina is he is with True Ticket. So we're going to have a discussion. Mark and I are going to discuss intellectual property, and then we're going to hear from our guest panelists, Jennifer and Matt, as to how they apply their intellectual property for use in their own businesses. And make sure we're on track. I think Mark is going to go ahead and bring up some slides now.
Mark, I don't know if you're on mute, but we can't hear you. Mark Gallagher.
It's about the 30th time I've heard that today. Anyway.
Everybody hears that. All right.
I'm just making sure everyone can see my screen so I can move forward. So when we think about brands and we think about them as there's two sides to the equation, right? So we have the real world application, and then you have the legal protection. Today, I'm going to really touch on the real world application, and then Mark's going to talk a little bit about how they're protected and how they work as legal instruments. So my own firm here, what we do is we define a brand as an experience that lives at the point where promise meets expectation. And what we mean by that is that it's really a two-sided relationship. So the promise is made by the brand owner. But in addition to the brand owner making that promise, the promise is also made by your competitors, friends, family, colleagues, the media, what have you. And it's also made by, well, brands that are outside of your exact sphere. So we all expect free shipping today, even though your company may not have made that promise. The truth is Amazon made it on your behalf, and it's become an expectation, which is the right-hand side of this equation. The individuals have an expectation of what they see your brand is doing or the value they think it will provide. If we think about how these two things come together, when promise properly manages expectation, you have a proper experience. But when they don't, that's where things start to get out of alignment. And a lot of times people think that the key is to under promise and over deliver. But the truth is you're only going to fail over time if you do that, as slowly your expectation grows to be, the over deliver is what I'll actually receive. So if we think about how this works, what it really comes down to is meaning, message, and delivery. Meaning is the thing you're trying to get across, what you want people to walk away with, that one seed of an idea. The message is how it's packaged in such a way that it makes sense. There's a quote that's been attributed to a bunch of different people, including Churchill, which is diplomacy is telling someone to go to hell in such a way they look forward to the trip, right? The meaning is go to hell, but the message is delivered in such a way that people say, this is for me. I think this makes sense. And often what happens is when people are developing these things, they think too much about delivery or maybe about the message and not so much about the meaning. So people develop things like names and taglines, and they're too worried about if it's cute or if it rhymes or something like that. But if we think about how these things work, we talk about something called brand signals. Now, brand signals are Pavlovian by nature. They're not something that you associate with the brand, but rather something that equates. And if we look at this from a neuroscience point of view, we realize that it's not about going from synapse to synapse to synapse. That would be an association, but rather these two things are one in the same. So if I say Nike, you think athletic sports apparel company. If I say Apple, you think the computer software company. But the truth of the matter is Apple's a fruit, Nike's the Greek word for victory. What's happened is these have transplanted that meaning over time. So when we start to look at these things and what brand signals are, they don't have to actually be trademarks. And so if we start to think about something like a lime and a Corona, well, this is intellectual property that's not actually owned. Anyone can put a lime into a Corona, and yet you don't even need to read the name on the bottle to know it's Corona. And the same could be said for Crayola crayons. They have a very unique smell. Or if you were to walk into a hotel and smell chocolate chip cookies, you know that you're in a DoubleTree. So the key here is that these signals and the way they work is they equate to the brand, and they equate to the brand in that they manage consumers' expectations. And so if we think about how these work, it comes down to the vessel, which is the name, the logo, what have you, and the value, that's the meaning that's placed within it. So if we were to think about something like a stop sign, there's nothing inherent to the vessel of a stop sign that means stop. The color red doesn't mean stop. Octagons don't mean stop. Even the word stop, you had to learn how to read and to understand that that word meant stop. So the vessel started off being empty, and the value that was placed in that vessel over time has now really defined the vessel itself. And so if we start to look at this, we realize that these vessels, names, logos, what have you, there's a certain amount of meaning, and then there's the opportunity. So the meaning is the thing that's been placed in there by you, the brand owner, or maybe by others. And the opportunity is the headspace, the amount of room that's there. So when we do things like develop names and develop logos, we have to look at it to say, what are we developing? And so if something's very descriptive, let's talk about words for a moment, and we'd have something like American Airlines. It's very clearly descriptive. It's an airline that flies to, from, and within America. And if we were to get more abstract, we'd start to look at something like Xerox. The name actually doesn't mean anything. In fact, they chose the name having a double X because there was no word with a double X in a live language. There was a double X in a dead language, but no one speaks that anymore, so it didn't matter. It's completely abstract. The vessel is empty, and it can be filled over time. Now, associative names are a little different. They're different in that they are not descriptive of what they provide, but rather the type of thing that they provide. So if we were to look at Sprint, for a phone network, and we understand that clearly it's a fast network, but it doesn't really tell us what business they're in to that degree. Now we've drawn out this grid, this matrix, if you will, and Mark Solomon would look at this through what we call the spectrum of distinctiveness. This is how the legal construct works, where whether something is truly novel, being abstract, the upper right-hand corner, or being overly descriptive and not necessarily trademarkable in the lower left. So if we start to look at those notions of descriptive, associative, and abstract that I just covered, and we start to look at them with names or logos, once again, they can be existing. Notice American Airlines, Sprint, and BlackBerry are all real words, whereas Rain-X, LoJack, and Cisco, these are all modified words. So we know these to be words, but then when we get up to fabricated words like Pentium, Memorex, and Xerox, these mean nothing in the sense that they have been constructed. Do they carry bits and pieces of the original meaning? Yes, but how that comes through will tell you whether or not it's descriptive, associative, or abstract. Now, as we look at these things, we really concentrate on where we're going to be before we determine a name. Most of the time that we spend is really around meaning, not message. So we really want to define the problem before we solve it. And this will be very clear on Jen's company in just a few moments. But when we look at that vessel, the vessel also denotes meaning in a certain way. So I'd like you to consider these two shapes. And I'd like you to assign these two words, Babu and Kiki, to the two shapes. And I can tell you with near certainty that you assigned Kiki to the sharp shape and Babu to the more blob-like shape. And this is because of how we process information. You have to understand that all language started with automatopoeia. So when you step on something that's sharp, you tend to make sharp noises. When you describe something to your mechanic, you emulate what that thing is. So when we look at shapes and when we look at sounds, we start to look at the interplay of these things. And so if you think back to that notion of vessel, you start to understand, I'm going to jump back a few slides here. You start to understand that the vessel itself has meaning in that something looks like, we associate it, it sounds like, and then the value is filled in over time. And just as I mentioned earlier, we look at something like Nike, and the value has basically eclipsed the original word. But at this point, I want to hand this off to Mark Solomon to talk a little bit about how these things actually work in a legal sense. Mark?
Thank you, Mark. Great introduction. And so we're going to take what Mark just described and then through use of intellectual property, make it have value or give value to the owner, which could be a company. So there are 4 general types of intellectual properties that we'll discuss today. And these should be fairly well known, but if you're not familiar, copyrights such as the images that Mark just showed could be protected. Those are original expression of ideas in a tangible medium, such as this format here. Put on paper, that's a different tangible medium, but those could be recorded with the Copyright Office. Various other forms of copyrights, such as motion pictures, various types of images, photographs, those types of things that can all be copyrighted. And on the right, you'll see the symbol, the copyright symbol, the year, and the owner. Now, you don't have to record it with the Copyright Office. It is recommended. You can get things called statutory damages if you go to enforce, if you've done it properly with the right timing. But just putting that notice to the public will give you some rights and notify the public that you are intending to protect it as a copyright. So that is a common law copyright by doing so. Trademarks, it'll prevent others from using a name, logo, sound, etc., and used as a source indicator. It comes across with goodwill that accrues over time. So it is nice to have it. And those are things like Xerox that Mark recommended. Words that may be merely descriptive, you're going to have a very difficult time getting through the Trademark Office. Sometimes we can use a supplemental register. And then As you get suggestive or fanciful or created, like Mark had mentioned, that gets a little higher on the spectrum of likelihood of success, provided there isn't somebody in advance of you. And so you can use a common law trademark to tell the world the little TM symbol. And once it's registered through the trademark office, you can use the R with the circle around it. So you may be familiar with that symbol.
Thank you for calling Gilroy Family Medical Group, the office of Dr. Kumar and Dr. Sakai.
And trade secrets. So that's a way to prevent others from taking, selling, et cetera, confidential information. You are going to want to mark it as confidential just to be sure that your employees know of it. You often hear that Coca-Cola, not any one person knows the formula. So in the more unpredictable arts or less predictable arts, that it's easier to protect as a trade secrets, things like mechanical arts, that's very obvious to invention, you probably wouldn't use trade secrets. And then patents, of course, is used to protect inventions. It could be utility patents or design patents for usefulness or functional things or utility, and ornamental would be for the designs. And there you'll give notice to the public by saying patent pending, if you have a pending application, or put on the number, or you can even specify these days a URL where people can go see a list of patents. And so we'll go to the next slide. It'll show how the timing works. So those are familiar. You'll see the trademarks. You'll see up at the top it says source indicator, early filing recommended, because it's not required. It's highly recommended. So you're the senior person registering, applying for a trademark. There is no end date of a trademark, provided you're making continual actual use. And the actual use, that's interstate commerce, so Massachusetts to New Hampshire is perfectly fine. If you use across the internet, that could suffice. And then your right to exclude others or junior users, right? So you're first, like Coca-Cola, MGM Grand, those people, they go after people who are gonna, try to use their mark. They're well registered and well protected. And so the timing, you can actually, before you've made use of it, like Mark comes up with a brand name, you say, great, let's file intent to use. And once we've made actual use, so you see the date of actual use on the timeline, then if you filed intent to use application, we can convert it to the actual use, and there is some value to doing that. Or you've started making use of it, you use a TM to tell the world, and at some point you say, you know what, I want to register. So you can do that. But on the patent side of things, you'll see that you have a conception, and prior to a public disclosure or offer for sale even, or any kind of product release, you're going to want to file a patent application that preserves rights in the US and foreign countries. After that date, if you file after, you have some grace period countries, it's more difficult. So we always recommend earlier. And then you'll see within 1 year, let's say you filed a provisional, just says, okay, we're going to preserve the rights to file. Then you file a non-provisional that's going to be examined. And then usually 2 to 4 years later, you go through an examination process, you come out with an issued patent. And notice on the right side, you'll see the 20 years, 15 for a design application. Up here, we're just showing utility application. So for 20 years from the original filing date, and with some exceptions, that you'll have the rights to the patent. So the patent means you are laying open your invention so others can look at it and build upon it. And that was built into the US Constitution to advance useful sciences and technologies, right? So that's the idea of the patent. So it has less life, although it can have some great value over the course of its pendency. And so we'll go to the next slide and just say that once you have some intellectual property just showing up here, trademarks and patents, that can actually be an interface to your outside world, right? To all of your relationship people. For example, manufacturers. Manufacturers will be careful because you have a patent, for example, and the manufacturer won't be able to work with a competitor potentially because you have rights for manufacturing, right? So it's a right to exclude others from making, using, selling them patents. For trademarks and patents, there may be some value there for, with respect to, if we look up top, early and late stage funders and partners. People giving over money may want to know that there's some collateral backing it. Intellectual property can be used as that collateral. And when we originally created this slide, I had thinking that, well, patents might be more important than trademarks with respect to funders. But Jennifer and Matt and Mark, I think they said, well, you know, sometimes they're about the same. So the intent was you could either have more value or less value. It does depend on what your product is, what your market is, the value that is perceived by these funders. And then likewise, you look at the company has distributors, and patents and trademarks could matter for distributors, but it does exclude distribution without authorization. So people could take a license if you own it, or in a sense of trademarks, you may just want to stop it because that could diminish the value of the trademarks. And then of course the market, you'll see trademarks is a slightly bigger fund because they may have some more value because the value can grow over time. Of course, if you're in the biology or chemistry space, the value of those patents can certainly accrue over time with respect to certain drugs for licensing purposes. And one more thing, you'll see in the middle that there's the company, we have leadership and employees. Now, actually, the same intellectual property can be very valuable to help keep people with the company, because while they do have the right to earn a living, if the rights stay with the company, so there's maybe a non-compete for a year, maybe a little bit longer, the patent rights and the trademark rights stay with the company. So it tends to foster a little bit of loyalty. It makes it a little harder for people to leave and just create for another value it's already in the company. And likewise, there's also some benefit, for inventors. They feel, special because you've proceeded to get some patent protection, the name's on a patent. So there's a lot of value, intrinsic for a company beyond just outside relationships. So that's a little bit, we'll go into some other discussions through Jennifer and Matt as we go forward, but just that's a little bit of the idea about some of these intellectual properties. Okay.
All right, so as Mark and I just outlined, things are pretty straightforward. They happen in a nice linear manner. You know when you start, when you finish, and how these things go through, but the truth is the world doesn't work that way. So I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit and just give you one example of how this stuff comes through. And so a great example, here is McDonald's. So we're all familiar with the term the golden arches. The truth is the term the golden arches predates the McDonald's logo. So if we look at this, they started using the term the golden arches somewhere in the late 40s. Now, if we take a look at it, the original name was McDonald's Famous Barbecue. You can see the logo that's locked up in the very top there where you see McDonald's Famous Burgers. And if you look at the sign on the right, you'll see that it's that same logo or variation thereof. And now look at the arches and look at the architecture that's here. So what's happened is the company took the thing that they owned in the public forum, being known as the Golden Arches, and redesigned its logo to exemplify that. So even if we look at the first column, second row, 1961, that logo is not necessarily an M, but rather the arches themselves. And it's not until 1968 that you start seeing logo as a true M. That's a 20-year span where the company built value over time by how they were known, and then adopted and adapted it in such a way that you can see it's a registered trademark. Now, as we go through these things, a lot of times companies have value in something that they do, the way they present it, something along those lines. And then they can own it at that point. Now, there are certain things like colors, which are extremely difficult to trademark. Jen, Mark, and I have the claim to fame as being able to have trademarked one, and I'll let Jen and Mark talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But as we start to look at these things, I'd like you to imagine that you're on the subway and you're at the far end of one car and you look all the way down to the next. You see someone reading a newspaper. The newspaper's folded back. You can't see the masthead, you can't see anything about it, but you can see the color of that newspaper. And based on that color, you can say, that's the FT, only the Financial Times is that color. And so there are certain things that can be done, that can be put together that provide additional value. And as you're building out your brand, there's going to be two things. There's going to be things that you intentionally designed, and then there's going to be things that you discover. They both have equal value if they're properly leveraged. Some of the things you designed, you're going to get thrown out. And some of the things you never intend, well, that's where the value is going to be. So at this point, I'm gonna stop the slide share, move back over, and hand this back over to Mark.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark. That was a good real life story. So I want to actually see if we could get a little bit of perspective from Jennifer and Matthew. One question is going back to the earliest. Like, how did you get exposed to intellectual property, and what made you believe that pursuing such rights would be of value to your respective companies? I don't know, maybe Matt, do you want to?
I was waiting for you to pick somebody. There's two ways to answer that, right? So for us as a startup, I think in our space, one of the things that everybody thinks about is patents right away, right? So I think when we first started, what can we patent? What can we claim? That was the very first thought for intellectual property for us. We incorporated in 2017, and that's one of the things we even had some sort of idea of a derivative patent for, related to dynamic pricing and ticketing and in a distributed sense. The second instance actually was with Mark, right? So we've done work with Mark and Black Coffee, and through that work, it really expanded my and our understanding of really what goes into your brand. For us, the initial thought was patents, because when you pitch investors, right, what do you have that we can patent, right? And there's so much more to it. And I think the Black Coffee team does a really nice job. Brand is really what's the emotion, what's the feelings your logos, your company evokes when people interact with it. And that's the first time we started thinking more broadly about how we communicate, what we want to communicate, and how we communicate that in space.
And Matt, maybe give for the audience, give a little context of what your company, True Tickets is setting out to do.
We are B2B infrastructure for secure, paperless, in-person event ticketing. Our goal is to be the infrastructure that connects ticketing systems and marketplaces, makes them more efficient, transparent, effective. The best analogy, Mark will appreciate this, is a company called Sabre. Maybe nobody's ever heard of that, but one of the reasons that you can get a JetBlue ticket, if your Delta flight's canceled because of Sabre. In the in-person event space, it's isolated, it's siloed, right? There's Ticketmaster really doesn't talk to SeatGeek, doesn't talk to Game Time. And so there's an opportunity to create much more efficiency by being an infrastructure solution that lives across all.
Okay. And so the IP you're pursuing, is it fitting into the context of you're trying to gain sort of access to market or investors? Both,
right? When a good analogy is obviously when you look at the computer and you see Intel inside, you're comforted that, all right, it's a quality processor running my computer. In ticketing, that's what we want people to feel when they see our logo. That's, as a B2B solution, we want to be that Intel inside of the ticket. So we want to provide some sort of consumer validation, right? Create trust with the consumer. On the investor side, that too, right? If you look at our name, True Tickets, it's simple, it's straightforward. That resonates with people. And in fact, we're in discussions with a partnership and an investor right now that'll be pretty important and impactful for us. And one of the things right away is they just love our name, right? It's simple, it's straightforward. And oddly enough, when we first started with our name, we tried to be kind of cute, right? You think of Uber, you think of these things that are both names and like verbs and nouns, right? They're things and I'm going to get my Uber, right? That was when we first started, and we were just struggling with the name. In fact, it was my younger brother who did some testing. We had some names we were trying out. Some of us liked it, some of us didn't. Some names resonated with men, they didn't resonate with women. And through just some dialogue, we stumbled upon True Tickets. And that just seemed clear. And when we first started with our logos, you can honestly Google our probably our name and see some of our original logos and colors, and you'll see that there's nothing truly unique about them. And then working with Mark and the Black Coffee team is figuring out how do you create something unique out of that, right? And I think they did a fantastic job. So in the marketplace, people know our colors, they know our logo, they know what we stand for, and it starts to create that feeling. And also, it's something that we can protect, right? So if you look at our logo and you look at our color set, it is unique. It's unique to the space, and it's something that we have trademarked, and we view that as value, right? We're building brand equity every day, and one of the things to think about as a startup too is, as you start, you don't want to go too far down the road with something that is generic, because you're missing out on that opportunity to build that brand equity, or you're allowing somebody else to either steal it from you or build it up, while you're not able to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And Jennifer,
if I can add one thing to that, because I think this
Absolutely.
is important. Matt touched on the notion of verbs and brands, but and Mark can speak to this. Mark Solomon can speak to this better than I can. But the truth of the matter is, brand names are not nouns; they're adjectives. And so you're buying a Kleenex brand facial tissue, not a Kleenex. So when we look back at, like I talked about before with promise and expectation, talking about the two sides of the coin, it's perfectly fine and somewhat preferable for the market to be referring to Matt's product as a true ticket. But if Matt were actually to go to market saying, get a true ticket, or this is a true ticket, he would actually put his, or could put his trademark at risk. So anytime you're naming something, no matter what it is, everyone loves to sit around the boardroom and go, let's refer to it like as a noun. It's a verb, we're gonna Uber there. Well, that's all great, but you could be creating a real problem for yourselves down the road. So it's one thing to talk about it in a forum like this or in a conversation. It's quite another to put it in writing or in an ad or something. Mark, you might want to touch on that and make sure people understand the risk there.
Yeah, it's a great point. So yeah, one of the things we'll do, especially if you're about to invest a lot, is run a very extensive trademark search. Make sure there are no conflicting registered marks, for example, looking at what might be out there in the market. US and foreign, those would be different types of searches. But before there's a very large commitment on a branding effort, you want to make sure that if you do proceed with a lot of those branding efforts, in the end, you will actually own the brand. It's troubling, sometimes when clients have to go ahead and rebrand, it's expensive. You may have created packaging. And so those types of efforts, you don't have to go through that whole process. And similarly for foreign, especially where you may be manufacturing, such as China, we do recommend to clients to go ahead and get the brand protection there, because unscrupulous third parties may seek to get that protection and then stop products on the dock and effectively hold you up. But these are very important issues. So at the original time of coming up with the branding, and Mark and I have worked closely on those types of issues, there's an extensive searching done, so the value is maintained, and you can, as Matt said, start growing value in the brand, day after day. And so maybe we'll turn to Jennifer, unless Mark, you had anything more on that point.
I'm just looking at the questions, and someone had made a comment about important things for current science and engineering college majors to know. One thing I want to go back to is, when you create a name like True Tickets or like Chris Scott or like Sapure, whatever it is, you have to come up with a description of what that thing is. And that description has a lot of value because it can be used for you and against your competitors. So if you take a case like rollerblades, they almost lost their trademark because they couldn't say what a rollerblade was. They told other people they couldn't use it. And people said, well, what do we use then? And they went, I don't know. And eventually they came up with the notion of inline skates. So everyone else is an inline skate. Only rollerblades make make rollerblade inline skates. Same thing is true with Tylenol and acetaminophen. And so one of the things that we've looked at working with Mark back and forth on this is essentially, how do we make sure that we have a beautiful description that works for us? We want to put our competitors in a position of having to make a claim that's not something they really want to be claiming. And so as we go through this, I find that scientists a lot and engineers a lot come up with something and then they want to give it a fancy name, not necessarily a trademark name, but they want to give it the generic name and they want it to sound a certain way. If you plan to build a business out of it, you might want to really pay attention to what you're going to call this in terms of other people using it over time and what you're going to call it in the sense of owning that trademark.
Excellent points. Excellent point. So Jennifer, maybe you can start off, give a description of your business, and then also say, how you were originally exposed to intellectual property, and why you thought that pursuing those rights would be, gain value for your business.
Thank you, Mark. I'm happy to be here this evening. And my story is a little bit different from Matt's in that I didn't start a company and then work to find out what to cover in terms of intellectual property. I'm a sole inventor from the very origin. And it wasn't until later in the development of the company did I bring in others to co-invent intellectual property. So for those of you who don't know, I am a patient. I have lived with inflammatory bowel disease since childhood, and I have Crohn's colitis. I would say about 12 to 15 years ago, I was hospitalized for the first time with complications, and I was in the hospital. My doctor prescribed for me a typical treatment for patients like myself, which is suppository medication 2 to 3 times a day. And it was taking about 2 to 3 hours out of my life, and I had to wear protective undergarments. So like every other patient, as soon as I started to feel well, I stopped taking all of my medication and became the poster child of the non-compliant patient. That was me. And I ended up back in the hospital. Second time I left the hospital, I was committed to living a better quality of life. And at home, I designed and invented a new applicator for suppository administration. I didn't know at the time that what I had was unique in terms of a design and a utility. And I taught myself plastics manufacturing and silicone molding on a small scale, made enough units in my own kitchen every single week to take care of my own personal care. And no one knew about my invention, and I didn't tell anyone. And there came a time where I really wanted to have a manufacturer make them for myself. And I had some very good advice, and that was to seek a patent before going outside to have manufacturing done. And it was the best advice given to me thus far. All of that happened pre-2007. I met Mark Solomon in 2007, and we filed our first application. I do have a comment too. There's a question here about foreign patents, OUS, and I have a strong opinion about that. We can talk about it later. It depends on the industry that you're in. Here we are in 2021, and my company, Chris Scott, is now selling the Saphir suppository applicator in 18 countries around the globe for patients who are suffering from spinal cord injury, lupus, MS, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and a whole host of indications. In meeting Mark Gallagher and really finding a name for the product, Saphir suppository applicator, it was really important, as he mentioned, the difference between Kiki and is it Babu? Definitely Saphir is more Babu than Kiki, because no one would want to use Kiki as a suppository applicator. I am of the opinion that intellectual property is very good and very important in the early stages of development of a company. So recognize that Chris Scott was established after the invention and the first intellectual property was in place. And that was intended to commercialize the product and then either out-license or develop into a pharmaceutical development company, which is what we are today. I do believe that trademark and branding, if treated well and cared for, will ultimately be much more valuable than patents. Patents, of course, keep that picket fence in place for the 20 years as you're starting to and beginning to develop what can be a strong brand. As Mark Gallagher pointed out, Chris Scott and now owns the color purple for a medical device, and that is unique. There are not many, as I understand, single color trademarks. One of the things that we worked on very early on is how do we develop a language to talk about our product that makes people feel comfortable? I don't know if you noticed, but in just my short time of speaking with you, I've used the word rectal only once, and that's intentional. We find a way to talk to patients, doctors, business people, investors in a way that makes them feel comfortable about what our product is and what it does serve for people. But part of that is giving them a way to talk about the device without actually having to use the name or having to refer to its generic term, which is a suppository applicator. Color is important to us. Today I was meeting with a study team in Utah, and the study members said, oh my goodness, this is a study that includes that purple applicator. So they knew the device by the color, even though the study itself is a drug product that is also patented and is for the indication of ulcerative colitis. Together, they are a combination product. But it was interesting to me that this was a gastrointestinal nurse, a GI nurse, who recognized the product by the color, not by the name, and not by the study. So that was, for me, pretty exciting, especially coming here tonight to talk to all of you. So it has been an interesting journey. I think it's very valuable. I think that your patents over time eventually can be worked around. There are other people, and recognize there are other people somewhere else in the world probably thinking about the same thing that you are. But there is one thing that maybe is unique, and that is the trademark that you can establish and to build, as Mark Gallagher says, the value in that vessel. And when we did the trademark search for the name Sephur, there was only one hit. And that was a gentleman who had the last name Sephur. He is located in Asia. And I do feel bad for him that his name is now associated with a suppository applicator. But we've created a lot of value in the name in the short amount of time. And then, of course, the color also is really important for us. Ultimately, just like Matt, we see our product as becoming the associated description and product of trust and softening care and need for all suppositories, not just those patients who are living with inflammatory bowel disease. And to that end, we've also expanded our intellectual property by doing some very interesting business deals with companies that have a need for female designed applicators that we also have encompassed in our trademark, because Sephur is a suppository applicator. It's intentional in that descriptor that it doesn't designate vaginal or rectal. So we've actually gone into the female space, and the device is now FDA cleared for both vaginal and rectal use. And as we build on that product line, we are also sensitive to when we make those arrangements in business deals with other companies. We offer to give them our guidance and our expertise, and part of that is sharing with them our instructions for use, which are a part of our trade dress and our brand. And we designed those instructions for use with their products. So it could be that someone is looking at a product that is not related to gastrointestinal disease or even a rectal product, it could be a female product, but they will see the instructions and recognize not only is the name Saphir suppository applicator associated with that, but the design of the instructions and the feel and the language that we use to describe how to use it, very familiar. So it's threaded all the way throughout. And if I can think about the future, our patents will expire, but just like when people are looking to shop for their favorite brand of facial tissue, maybe they have a preference for Kleenex, because now we are actually calling facial tissues Kleenexes. People will trust the name or the brand Saphir or the purple applicator, and it will be associated with that. Creates more value.
Okay, great. Maybe it'd be interesting to hear about maybe specifics on how you have used the intellectual property in discussions with potential, I don't know if investors is the right place to start, or customers. I don't know if Matt, if you wanted to say a few words, if you have some specific examples, say, well, this actually turned out to be very good. Like sort of Jennifer just mentioned, people had already heard of the purple applicator. Are there any particular examples you might have?
Yeah, for us, because we're B2B, it really boils down to partners and other clients. And so if you look at, for example, one of our clients is the Boston Symphony. If you go to the Boston Symphony today, and unless you're, I'm not quite sure how you can get a physical ticket. I think they have options for it. But if you've gone to the Boston Symphony, you've actually used the True Ticket service. Now, one of the things is, unlike Jennifer, we allow our clients to brand their ticket front end, so that's very important for them, right? So the Boston Symphony wants to create a look and a feel, but you will see a True Tickets logo, you will see powered by True Tickets. So there's always some element of brand building in there. And that was actually a suggestion from one of our clients. So initially when we built out the ticket front end, which is the mechanism with which we deliver the ticket, we didn't have any branding on there. One of our clients said, oh, you should put something on there. Are you okay with that? So I was a little bit shocked that they were supportive of that. But our brand is more for our clients, not on the consumer side, and for investors, right? I touched on it a little bit in my initial answer, but it's very straightforward. And one of our partners that we'll be announcing here likely in the next couple of weeks, that's one of the things they really liked about our company was that brand. Obviously, look, the technology works, the solution works. There's a lot of credibility in what we're doing and what we're building. But for them, we had been talking to them now for almost 2 years. And initially when we met, they've actually rebranded one of their companies. And they wanted to rebrand using our name because they thought it was simple and straightforward. So they rebranded as something else. But you can see that if you can create a brand that just resonates and hits right away, and people kind of grok it or get it, how valuable that is, right? That again, that goes to brand equity. There's value to that. There was a question in the chat that, what's the most valuable IP to build? And the question is, it depends, right? You look at what Jennifer is doing with her company and where she's focusing, her efforts in building brand equity with IP is very different than what we're doing, right? So copyrights, trademarks, patents, code, trade secrets, right? All those are different. So it really depends on the industry you're in. So you can't really patent code. You can patent medical devices. Those are, again, very different. But our code base itself is a trade secret, right? So we're very protective of that code base because that is IP for us. Same thing with the brand. So when it comes to how you think about building a defensible brand strategy position an IP position, you have to look at your industry, right? What works, what won't work, and make sure you're allocating your efforts to build in areas that are going to have return on investment for you. Because like I said, I could try to go after patenting code and other things like that. It's not going to work, right? It's going to be a waste of my time. Versus, Mark brings up some great examples where it's just recognition. You see a color, you see a logo, and you just instantly know a feeling comes over you, right? That's what you want to generate, and that's actually very hard for others to try to replicate if you do it well.
Yeah, and just one clarity. So the code itself, we could go ahead and copyright it. We could redact certain important features, but there are sometimes innovations in code that could actually be patented and used to exclude others. Sometimes in code, you think, well, it moves so quickly, maybe I don't want to go for patent protection. It could be expensive, but there are times where it can be very valuable both to the company and for excluding others, because that itself could be really useful. So there are occasions, right? And I do agree with you, Matt, that sometimes you want to hold on to it. It does, however, potentially allow for people to innovate, design around. So it sometimes, if patents can help, then that's okay. But it does come down to a decision in your marketplace, maybe for your investors, and overall costs, and those types of issues are a consideration. But it is very important to think, what is my product? What is the space? How valuable are patents compared to trademarks or other forms of intellectual property, such as trade secrets?
So Mark, I just want to address one question that was in the chat here. So Steve Axel had asked, so if purple was part of Jennifer's patent, then competing devices that are purple can be ruled infringement. I just want to point out that this actually isn't a patent, it's a trademark. And so, yes, it can be ruled an infringement, but if it were a patent, well, 20 years from now, they could have purple devices. Because it's a trademark, we don't have, if you remember back to Mark Solomon's timeline there, it's essentially infinite as long as we're renewing this and moving through. So yes, other medical devices, but it does come down to that description that I mentioned earlier and Jen talked about. So how you write up that description is very important. So I joke with Mark Solomon about how we want to be specifically vague. And so we want to be as broad as possible, but if we're too broad, we won't actually receive that trademark, or we're hitting too much. We're not telling people what we are. And if we're too sharp, well, great. We're the only company that can do this one thing at this tiny little point of real estate that's, a millimeter by a millimeter. And so as you go through these things, a lot of times people are either developing IP or protecting IP, and they think they've done a great job, and they've actually left a lot of holes, or they might actually be hurting themselves long term. So Jen can tell people, you don't get to make a purple device. But if it's in the automotive space, they can't, right? She can't do anything about that. It's totally different. And as we start to get into what Jen does, and Jen, I'm sorry, I just don't remember the exact language in terms of how big the space is. But if you think of it as real estate, we're defining that plot of land. And it might be round, it might be long and thin, it might be square, whatever it is. That definition, anything that falls outside of it, we aren't protected. We're only protected into what we've defined. And that's why the language you use needs to be, I'll say, specifically vague. Mark, you could probably talk more about that than I.
No, that's a good point. And another point just to follow on. So I did mention the intent to use applications. So you can write a laundry list of uses for purple or true tickets. And if you don't actually, in the description of goods, you eventually get the allowance because you're the first with true tickets or Saphir or color purple for that particular article, then you can go ahead and cancel those where those goods or services that are not going to be used, where the mark is not going to be used in connection with those goods. But the intent to use, you said, okay, I think I'm going to do this. You have to be honest about it. You have to sign a declaration. And then, but when it comes time, you get the allowance to say, okay, well, it turns out we've gone through our product testing, our market testing, and we're only going to be applying it to these goods or services. So we cancel that, and that's part of the normal process. So, as we mentioned, intent to use, you think you're going to use it for a whole host of items, and then you can exclude those that you're actually not making actual use. And if you do later, you'll file a new application for those other goods or services.
So can I raise a point about cost? The cost for intellectual property, maintaining it, defending it, and treating it well is extreme, especially in the space of patents. And just like with trademark, as Mark Gallagher pointed out, you want your you want it to be as broad as possible, but still specific enough that you can actually claim it and receive a patent claim that is patentable and defendable and can ultimately hold value over time, depending on your industry. So for instance, when I decided to build Chris Scott and build a team around that, of course, it was important to go out and raise money and speak to investors. There is no way a medical device, or what we are now today, which is a pharmaceutical development company, could ever raise money without having intellectual property in the form of patents. It's very important, not just for the investor's sake, but also when it comes to regulatory approvals and protecting the intellectual property once FDA approval comes about. So in our space, once there is an approval for a new drug that we are working on today, we will be allowed to attach the patents and the trademarks to the Orange Book filing, which is the ultimate filing for drugs in the United States, that will keep others out of the market space of even applying for an FDA application. So that stalls our competitors for a certain amount of time. Of course, there's only 20 years to develop a drug. Most drugs take about 12 to 15 years to complete phase 3 and to file an application. So in the end, you have maybe 3 to 5 years with which to recoup enough revenue to justify and recoup the development cost before generic comes to market. That's why it's important early on, as you're patenting your invention, to also think about trademarks and brand so that you can extend that runway. And it's not inexpensive. Most drug companies focus, even the largest like Glaxo and Pfizer and Bausch Health, file their patents only in the United States because OUS patent filing is extremely expensive. I can tell you that very shortly after, was it 36 months, Mark Solomon, that we filed our first OUS patent? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was in 7 regions around the globe. It was extreme because we didn't even really have a fully formed company. We were pushing all the chips into the middle of the table and saying we're going to do this. And here we are in 2021. And I can share with you that at this point, we're talking with pharmaceutical companies who are looking to commercialize our product once it's FDA approved. That's really not our strong suit. Our strong suit is developing drug formulations, chemical compounds, and devices, and we'll stay in that space. So to partner for the commercialization of the product so that it's realized and then creates revenue, to, of course, recoup the development cost, but also share back to investors the investment that they put into the company. I can share with you that some companies really were only interested in our development product because it has global reach. We have patent protection in the major healthcare markets around the globe. So when you're looking for what is the end game and what you want to do to monetize your intellectual property, think about who ultimately will purchase the rights if that's what you're looking for. In our case, we were looking for the biggest of the biggest pharma companies that had global reach because our product is not FDA approved. It's not approved by BfArM in Germany. It is truly one of the world's largest unapproved drug products. So the scope was large. It made sense to cover the intellectual property worldwide, and it is a big risk. There are many companies out there that either can't afford to do it or really are only focusing on the United States because it makes the most sense from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, and you do raise a good point, Jennifer, that you're talking about patenting in various countries. And so the audience, those who aren't familiar, that patents run country by country. So the United States, your US patent won't protect you in European countries. The way we do that is we'll file internationally and then oftentimes go to the European Patent Office, get the grant there, and then go through a validation process for individual countries. So you don't have to file for patent protection, but then you don't have the right to exclude others. And then Jennifer may not have the same conversation with large pharma if they're free to use it in, that same formulation or the device over in Germany or France or any other country that's of major market. So sometimes it's very important to understand who maybe your target audience is, large pharma, for example, and enter the countries, go to the countries where they intend to be as part of, let's call it your relationship, value, that you bring to the table.
And manufacturing, Mark. So remember, like we filed in Israel, which is a very small country, has a very small marketplace, but it's one of the largest manufacturing countries for medical device in the world. So we filed a patent there to prevent the infringement for then coming back and importing it into the United States or other countries.
Excellent. Yeah, a great point. Right. So manufacturing and marketing. Where are your markets? So and I like that because that does mean others will have to come to you, and it gives you some more value in the negotiations. When that happens. So right. And Matthew, you also you've proceeded with at least some trademark protection internationally.
Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, I think it was you.
Yeah, Matthew.
Honestly, Mark, have we? I think we have.
Yeah, few countries.
I think we have. We do actually operate in 2 countries, so we're live with a venue in London. So I do believe we applied for protections.
Right, the UK, I think Europe also separately, and Australia, maybe New Zealand as well. So there are there is some markets that I think True Ticket said we'd like to have some brand protection over there.
I'd like to point out one thing that Mark said, which always kind of baffles me, and then I have to go explain it to a client. And so while we talk about different countries, when you talk about European registration, there is the EU. So it's European registration, only it doesn't cover all of Europe. And the only way I can equate it is you're at the airport and you start looking at it going, can I get in this line or do I need to get in this line, right? Because it just doesn't make sense. So there's, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, we had an issue with Bulgaria. Was that the one country that we started to get into issues with something?
Yes.
So you really want to look at where you are doing business, where you plan to do business, and then go out to that next thing as to where you're likely to do business. Because also, if you have a startup, there's a good chance you're looking at an exit, right? And you're going to sell this to someone else, and they're going to be looking at these things saying, okay, where am I protected? Where can I go? Because a lot of times, there are no mergers, only acquisitions. And a lot of times someone's just saying, I can put you into my sales channel. I can put you into this other area. And if these things are already protected, in my experience, it can add value. Sorry if that was completely off base, but I think it's something that often gets confusing.
Yeah, it's good. And yeah, I hope everyone's following. So one thing is, remember at the beginning, we were talking about, well, you can enter with a trademark application. You can file in the US within 6 months, seek protection in other countries and claim the earlier date here in the US. And there are various ways of doing that. And you can do it at any time, bearing in mind the risk is that there could be a senior user for True Tickets. If somebody says, oh, look at this, it's a nice name, I'll use it here in Europe or the UK, for example. But the patents, you don't have that luxury of waiting to see if you've developed a market or a brand name has assembled, like the McDonald's Arches, right? You don't have that luxury in the patents. You have to go earlier. And as Jenna was saying, sort of take that risk that you're going to get that patent value, for use in some, business context later. But just bear that in mind that there are the different timing requirements.
So there's another question here that's interesting, is further back at around 6 o'clock, that asks that if it's so hard to defend, I think, intellectual property, and big companies or corporates can run smaller company into the ground by building around your IP, what makes it truly valuable Well, it really comes down to the patent claims. And I think we've been talking a lot about trademark, but really your patent claims are sort of the fence mark, or the place in which your invention covers the scope and someone else can't infringe and come in. Early on, we had conversations with large pharma who looked to design around our IP and our patents and gave up because they couldn't do it. And that was a good sign, because at Chris Scott, being a startup, we could not afford to go to the cost of a freedom to operate report. And ultimately, the strength of the patent claims are really what are going to determine whether or not the patent is ever issued. There are really only just over about 10 million US patents ever issued. So most of the applications fall flat. They are not issued, they are not found to be inventive, and they're not found to be unique. But that's an even bigger challenge, if I can share with you, that if you have something that is truly unique to the world, it's never been seen before, not only do you need to create a market, you also have to explain what it is and why it's important and why it has value. In my scenario, the world had never seen a suppository applicator. That blew my mind. It would be like, for instance, at the time when people were only eating with a spoon, and all of a sudden someone invented a fork. A fork is valuable. But trying to explain to people who were only eating with spoons that the tines were important, and you could stab the meat and cut the meat easily, and also use it just as easily as a spoon, was probably a hard sell. And that's the hard sell that I had in the beginning, was trying to explain to people why it was useful, why no one had ever thought of it before, and then go out and raise investor money. If we had not found something truly unique in the patent claims, it never would have been issued. Isn't that true, Mark Solomon?
That's exactly right. So it's definitely this balancing act between distinguishing over all that has come before, while still gaining broad protection for what you are doing now. And so oftentimes we'll say, okay, well, this is as broad as we think we can go. We understand the art. Always something comes up during prosecution you haven't been aware of. So you try to build up some backup plans. I think actually yours, Jennifer, was fairly successful, is going straight through with the original strategy that we had set forth. And then we always say, well, keep trying to invent around yourself, right? You know, knowing that your own work is going to be the closest priority, because that's what others are going to do, innovate, right? So it's part of that innovation. And as you innovate, think about the branding on top of that innovation, because if you could lock them together, I don't know, Mark Gallagher, if you see those innovations, is that something you say, well, maybe it's time to rethink some branding? I don't know, because we'll protect it, but maybe Mark and Matt and Jennifer view things through a different lens.
Mark, you're on mute.
Thank you. I wanted to apologize. My audio is breaking up. I heard Mark Gallagher, and that's it.
Oh, okay. So I'll refer as innovations, right? The company innovates over their own works. Hopefully I'm coming through. That, do you ever go back and say, oh, well, Jennifer or Matt, maybe it's time to think about some additional branding? Is that something that you might recommend?
So I want you to consider that just as brands are a wayfinding system to a degree, right? So we used Kleenex earlier. So you say Kleenex, and Kleenex is facial tissue. At a certain point, that brand becomes so anchored to what it is that it prevents the company from actually moving forward. And so you have to evolve over time. A good example of this is Xerox. We're all familiar with Xerox PARC. We know like all the work that they did. We wouldn't have the mouse. We wouldn't have a GUI operating system. But this all came out of a company based on photocopies. And what happened when Xerox turned around and said, we're not going to be a photocopy business anymore. We're going to be in the high-tech space. They almost went out of business, because when people hear the word Xerox, they go photocopy. And so there is a point where you're trying to build a castle and you're keeping everyone else out. But at a certain point, you find you've built a prison and you can't get out. And so as we look at these different things, we're often looking at it through the lens of, and I think this is very important if you consider this. Products don't have brands. Brands have products. And so if we look at that, we start to see how these things evolve over time. And so the BlackBerry was a product with a brand. But when you think of a BlackBerry, what is it? The real innovation was having this phone with a full keyboard. But that innovation went away and it was replaced by this innovation, right? And this innovation is, I don't need a keyboard. The keyboard's dynamic. They can actually package these things and then program them while they're still in the packaging. So they completely pushed BlackBerry aside. And what did BlackBerry do? They said, hey, we don't have a keyboard now anymore either. And everyone went, that's really nice. So cute. A BlackBerry is a phone with a keyboard. And so what happens is those vessels that I mentioned before get filled with meaning. And it's pretty hard to displace that meaning over time to become something else. However, it is really easy. Just a little bit of sewage can absolutely just kill whatever meaning was there. So you take a brand like Enron and it's not salvageable. There's nothing there. So to your point, Mark, about innovating, I would put innovating at one dimension where you're pushing your brand into being something else and expanding, but you also run the risk in the opposite direction of protecting yourself so much, not being specifically vague in terms of legal, but also telling the world that you are something in such a way that they're just not going to let you change.
Gotcha.
Again, sorry to over answer your question.
Oh, no, that was good. Actually, I started to think about Matt as I'm thinking about the verticals, right? You are, powered by True Tickets. Are there other verticals or other products? You don't have to mention, right, if they're not public, but are you thinking about, okay, how do we then expand our reach? Or are you still using some of the early IP and the early development to continue to gain traction in your existing market?
We're always thinking. Mark brings up a good point. You obviously, you want a brand and you want an image that has longevity, enough discreteness, enough breadth, right? And so if I bring up the True Tickets logo, you can kind of see it here, but maybe not. Can I bring it back? I don't know if I can.
Just about.
Yeah. But if you look at the True Tickets logo, unfortunately, the virtual backgrounds don't work. I didn't test this ahead of time, but if you look at the True Tickets logo, you'll see it, right? It looks like a couple different things. It looks like a QR code. Our tickets are dynamic QR codes. It looks like two T's. It looks like two people sitting together in an event, right? That is done by design. That's what I really like about our logo. Now, that's helpful, but if, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years from now, dynamic QR codes go away, we may need to reassess. Is that a change? Thank you, Amy. Is that a change to, yeah, you can kind of see the spinning, TT, right? We have to assess, should we change the branding, the logo, right? Or if we're building our products, do we have multiple brands? So I think you constantly have to be thinking about, does this fit under the umbrella? Does what it does, or yeah, poor grammar, reflect accurate, is that accurately reflected by the brand? So let's say we went into something completely different. If we went into in-venue food and beverage ordering or curated experiences, is that a different brand, right? Is that do we want people to feel something different? And look, you can constantly see this all the time, right? I mean, obviously Google did Alphabet, Facebook did Meta. So you see these evolutions, right? 5 years ago, does Facebook rebrand as Meta? No, not a chance, right? But as they start to think about their future, what that means, what they want it to resonate, I mean, obviously the Facebook one's probably a little complicated, but I think you need to be thinking about, what is my product and brand portfolio today? Does that, how long is that going to last? And as things start to evolve, do you need to shift it?
Is that day to day, or do you have a board of directors?
Not day to day. I got enough stuff going on day to day. I would say that running a startup, you always have, there's always different things are prioritized, right? So at the moment, we're, like I said, closing out a partnership and an investment round. that's my priority, right? And then something, we'll get through that. Something else will take a priority, and typically, usually it's these things that just build up over time, and they get to a point where, and we're working with Mark actually on rebranding our value proposition one pager. So we did one a year ago. We have more data, we have better data, and we have additional things we want to communicate in a succinct way. So that's time for a revisit, right? So I wouldn't say that, there's not really a frequency to it, other than you as a leader can start to see signs in your business, in your market, if things aren't resonating. And you then need to be cognizant of that and address it. Sometimes things change so fast, you're literally changing something you changed 6 months ago. Sometimes it lasts 4 years, right? So with Mark, what we did with True Tickets regarding our logo and our color set has been set for a couple of years now, right? I think, Mark, we did the work in 2019?
So given the current pandemic, everything just feels like yesterday or 10 years ago. I have absolutely no idea.
But yeah, I don't see us necessarily changing that, but now you could say there's a couple different ways to think about it, right? If we stay in the ticketing space, our color set is unique. Maybe there's a different branching out of logos, right? To capture different things. Because if you look at within the space, like Vivid Seats and SeatGeek and Ticketmaster, or Game Time, whoever you want to look at, if you look at their primary, secondary, tertiary colors, ours are unique. And that was one of the things by design, right? So I would say that there's likely a lot of longevity there, and there's a lot of value there, because we want to continue to emphasize that. Now, if we expand into things that, like I said, aren't related to a QR code or the technology changes, we may want to evolve. But I can't say that there's like a discrete frequency to it. It's a little more art than science, but hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah.
To think about it.
Let me give you guys an example of something that you probably all know, and it will probably come into play. I want you to think to yourself for a minute when the last time Coca-Cola changed its logo. And I doubt very many of you are going to say every 6 months. But the fact of the matter is, if you go to a Coke machine and you buy a Coke and you compare the can to the machine, they will not match. So what Coke has cleverly done is to constantly modify their logo in such a way that it always looks fresh and new, but it always pays homage to the last one. So they're always moving. Imagine you're in a race. It doesn't matter if you're in a vehicle or a foot race or what have you. The only way to maintain your first position is to constantly be in motion. The market is all the competitors in that race moving forward. You maintain a position. And if you relax for just a little bit, you're going to fall behind. So there is the constant updating, the constant refresh just to maintain position. So in this sense, it's the Red Queen problem, right? It's here you can see you have to do all the running you can just to stay in place. So as we look at brands and as we look at these things, when you change your brand identity, it should directly reflect a change in brand strategy. Your brand strategy, any change there, should directly reflect a change in business strategy. I want you to consider Yahoo, right? And what happened when they changed their logo? And everybody went, what? And Marissa Meyer is sitting there going, I spent the last 2 months working with my graphic designer. Look what we did. And everybody else is going, yeah, the stock's tanking and you're playing logo design. What's going on? What are you doing with the actual business? That's why people were mad. They weren't mad because they didn't like the logo. They're mad because it didn't symbolize any other change. The purpose of that level of change is either to maintain consistency or signal change. You get in your car, drive down the street, you look, and you see your favorite restaurant. They get a new awning. You don't think anything of it. They get a new logo and you go, the menu probably changed. I don't know. Maybe it's under new ownership. I don't know what could have happened. They have a new name and you go, my favorite restaurant isn't in business anymore. So the degree of change in all these things, you might get bored with it. You might say, hey, we got to just freshen it up a little bit. But I can't tell you the number of companies, brands you guys know, who come to us and say, we just want to freshen it up. Let's do something new. And our first question is why? And 9 times out of 10, they don't have a good why. They have we're just getting a little bored of blue, right? And it'll be like Coca-Cola going, I don't know, red, let's just mix it up. How about blue cans? What do you think? And so what happens is you're making decisions usually based on how you see the world. And you have to look at it how as the world sees you. So your brand strategy, and we've been talking about identity, but your brand strategy is the lens through which you see the world and through which the world sees you. So
Mark,
when Matt referenced, go on, Matt.
I was going to say, question for you. How would you then put into context the slight changes Coca-Cola makes to its logo, right? So you talked about like there's got to be a reason for change. How would you contextualize the example you gave with Coca-Cola with the framework you just explained?
So Coca-Cola is changing in a way that you believe is constant because they're changing with you. So what ends up happening is you see Coca-Cola today and it feels like it's always been fresh. This is true with a Jeep, a Porsche 911, Wayfair sunglasses, and Eames lounge chair. These things are classic, but if you actually compare a Series 1 Eames lounge chair to, I think they're on Series 9, there's a lot of differences just in construction. Park, the original Porsche, well, let's skip the 356, right? You look at the original 911, park it next to a new 911, and they're night and day, but our memory of it is what matters. So what we're doing is we're weaponizing how memory works. Now, I want you to consider for just a moment, right? Supposedly every cell in your body is replaced every 7 years. If that's true, that means you don't have an original memory that's less than 7 years old, or it's more than 7 years old. It means every memory is a memory of a memory of a memory of a memory of a memory. And so, they say you can't go home again. You have to look at it and say, are you trying to replicate home? Or are you trying to replicate what you think home is? And that's what Coke's doing. It's giving your childhood back. It's constantly maintaining it to that degree. If you're into hot sauce, then you build up a tolerance. Same is true of alcohol, same is true of a lot of things, right? And so we have to adapt the tolerance to make sure that the experience lines up. Make sense?
Yeah.
Again, over answered your question, sorry.
No, it's all good. So then maybe Jennifer, you've gone through the process. It seems like your company has, I wouldn't say pivoted, but gotten to some various verticals. Knowing what you know now about intellectual property, you feel like you're in alignment. Your IP is in alignment with the company, what it represents, the direction it's going, and the products it offers?
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. And just as you spoke earlier, you have to continue to innovate and design around yourself because others are going to try and do that. So here we are now with over 70 issued patents, and it's everything from manufacturing, packaging, different drug formulations and structures. And not that Chris Scott's going to be the one to go out and commercialize all of that, but protecting others from coming into this space and doing what we think could possibly be done in the future to revolutionize the drug delivery, or what would be a quote unquote suppository medication, or ultimately, as Mark Gallagher and I have talked about before, maybe a suppository is not an ovum shaped or a bullet shaped solid, drug contained device. Maybe it looks different, and some of our patents, as you know, contemplate what that could be. So yes, absolutely. It's just giving us opportunity for the future.
And your investors, they feel good. I'm assuming you have to, go to various meetings and explain that alignment of IP and the product growth.
Yes, but I would say that intellectual property at this stage of the game is less of a conversation or a concern, just by virtue of the industry that we're in, because we're at phase 3 drug development. And in that study, we're on the other side of the pivot point in terms of whether or not it's a go or a stall. So most drugs don't get to phase 2, and we're into phase 3. So it's less of a topic of a discussion, but in the beginning, it was vitally and critically important at every meeting.
Right, so it's part of your pathway to where you are now.
For sure, it's more of a topic of discussion with potential partners who may commercialize the products once they're FDA approved.
Okay, great. Matthew, same thing. Is you feel like you're in alignment with, I know it's a little bit more of an early stage, but the alignment, your understanding is how you might use it. You have good familiarity with the, your IP options.
I do. And it goes back to every industry is different. Every stage is different. So obviously the industry we work in, I'd say the patent stuff is, I would say, is less valuable, or is just harder to get return on investment. Several times I've had investors ask me, well, what do you have patented, or what do you have going in? It's like, look, do you think that's actually going to do any good? They go, no, honestly, no. They just ask, right? But in Jennifer's industry, is very critically important, right? Like you kind of can't get anywhere without it. In our space, one of the things I like to say is continuous innovation is a defensible position. And we're always thinking about how to innovate, how to outperform not only our competition, but us. And that's one of those that helps you stay in a leadership position. Another good example, and actually this is one from Mark, right? So AI algorithms. Once someone's developed an AI algorithm, they throw it out there because they want people to use it. It only makes their algorithm better, right? So they can kind of stay, there's no way you can catch up with them. If they've developed a good algorithm and they make it, essentially publicly available, they're always going to be 2 steps ahead of you. Doesn't matter what you do, right? So I think it boils down to understanding your industry, understanding how you engage with the market, and investing in areas that are going to drive the highest ROI. Again, not to say you can't, Mark, you brought up a good point, you can patent code, but maybe are you working in aerospace and defense, right? Where it's launch trajectories and things of that, or something around that nature where it's very unique. Most of what we're doing in ticketing, I would say our efforts are best not focusing on trying to patent what we're doing, but actually, again, just continuing to innovate, continuing to deliver the best, most optimal product to the market, and devoting our resources there, and obviously the other areas, right, like trade secrets, which is code, trademarking, branding, developing brand awareness, developing brand equity.
Right, and as you mentioned, the AI, you start thinking about, well, you posted out there, well, that could be open source, and there are special issues there, too much for this forum, but that's another area of IP that is important for those in the software space to be aware of.
Well, I would say, I would add quick too, like look, open source is great. Make sure you understand the open source licenses that you're going to have to adhere to, right? So I think it's the copyleft, or there was a GPL3. Exactly. We do leverage a lot of open source at True Tickets. I would say that we are very diligent about open source licenses and what that means. So obviously, Mark, I think we can cover it quick, but basically a copyleft license is the colloquialism used. Essentially, if you build anything with a copyleft license, you have to then open source it yourself, right? So your trade secret, your code, actually, that has to become everybody's. And that is something to be very, very mindful of. There are people who got in a lot of trouble and lost a lot because they weren't cognizant of that aspect of what they were building.
Right. And does it explain that, right? As you're doing a startup, you start thinking you should really pre-plan almost a pathway. Is what IP are you going to need, what your tools might be, and how can you actually attain the most IP value to be able to be in a situation like Jennifer and Mark for reaching out to your contacts. As you may remember, we had the patents and the trademarks. Other things could be the licenses. All those types of IP issues are part of your relationships to your sphere of, the market, the investors, the manufacturers, distributors. But that's all very much a part of it. So it is very important to go in there, eyes wide open as to what your options are. And you talk to somebody like Mark Gallagher on your branding, he can vet some of these issues and, start to say, well, I don't know everything in the legal sense, but I do understand how that might affect you toward your ultimate business goals. And then if you have some legal issues, of course, he's well aware of these these issues to refer you to, somebody who can advise in the legal side of things as well. Anyone else, Mark?
Mark, you bring up one thing that that I think is a real mistake as people do any type of brand development, which is they often go to whoever it may be, whether it's an ad agency, a graphic designer, or an actual branding agency. And too often that work gets done and it's run by legal at, I don't know, the 11th hour, who turns around and goes, yeah, you can't call it that, right? So they think, oh yeah, but I bought the domain, I'm all set. So one thing that you guys might not know is that I have reached out to Mark prior to even going to the point of coming up with an idea. I called Mark, I'm going to guess about a year ago. I'm a little messed up on the timeline. Said, we have an idea. I need to know if it's trademarkable. We want to play 2 different notes at the same time and create a sound brand. And Mark and I went back and forth for, I'd say, more than a month about how this would work and how we might be able to create something that's truly unique. So we were working towards building something around the legal constructs, as opposed to investing all that time up front and then saying, will it work? And so we all like to talk about things in a linear manner, but it's really just a big pile of spaghetti. And so the earlier you're talking to legal and finding out what's possible, you can actually save yourself a lot of time.
Great point. So I think
I just want to
Oh,
interject here. Sorry, Mark, for interrupting, but it is 1 minute past 7. And I wanted to give people who are attending a chance to introduce themselves so they can, the speakers we all know. Fascinating discussion, great moderation, Mark, Matt, and Jennifer, thank you so much. But for those of you who would like to, this is our version of virtual networking, turn on your video and your microphone and just quickly introduce yourself. I'll start. I'm Amy Goggins. I'm the program director at the eForum, and I know many of you, but I'd like to know more of you. I'm happy to see some of you turning on your cameras. So maybe what I will do is just go by who I can see. So Brian Tarbucks.
Hi, I'm a software architect at Foundation Medicine. We do cancer genomics. I actually have 10 patents in the software fields, and some were really great and some were just there to stomp on other people. And I was a gopher at Fish and Richardson patent attorneys when I was younger. But hi.
Cool. Nice to meet you. Caprice, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am a newly employed clinical analyst at Scott, and just happy to be here and happy to get to hear people speak.
Nice to meet you both. Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica Bishel.
Hi.
I'm a patent agent at Hamilton Brooks, Smith & Reynolds.
Excellent. Welcome. And Deirdre, I know Deirdre, but you can quickly. You look like you're someplace sunny.
Yes, I'm in this delightful location.
Nice.
It's always daytime where I am. Hi, I'm Deirdre Sanders. And nice to see you. I'm a partner at Mark Solomon's firm, Hamilton Brooks, Smith & Reynolds, and I work with Erica as well. And I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed this presentation. I'm on the biotech life sciences side of our patent IP practice, and I think there's just a lot to be learned here for all the different technologies. So thank you everybody for your excellent presentation.
Thank you. Alex. I don't see Alex turning on his video, so I'm going to go on to Katya. She's not there.
I'm
there
sorry.
she is.
I'm looking. I have dual monitors, so I don't know where I'm looking. Hi, everybody. Again, I introduced myself earlier. I'm Katya Wald. I'm the executive director of the eForum. I always like to say long time listener, first time caller, but that's not true. I just want to say thank you to all the speakers again. You guys did a tremendous job, and I do see some of our entrepreneurs from our Start Smart class and our mentor program on here. So I hope you guys were taking notes, because there was a tremendous amount of information here.
Yes, and as I think we mentioned before, we will be sending out a recording. So if you didn't take notes, you got it. Eugene, hi Eugene. Haven't seen you for a while. Maybe Eugene is not there. Rick. Hi Rick. Do you want to introduce yourself? No. Alex. Now I see Alex.
Hi, thank you. Yes. Thanks for turning my video back on. I couldn't turn it on myself. So maybe I wasn't supposed to be on video earlier or something like that. Sorry about that.
It's always hard to quickly do that.
Thank you. So I'm a patent attorney as well. My background is biomedical engineering. I work a lot in the medical device space. I work with Mark, I work with Deirdre, and I also work with Jennifer. And it's great to hear some of the non-technical aspects of brand protection, as well as I'm familiar with the technical aspects, of course, but this is
absolutely.
Very interesting. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Corrine? All right, Judy?
Hi
I feel like
there.
I'm putting people on the spot here, but
no, not at all. Hi there, I'm Judy White, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Hamilton Brooks Smith Reynolds, and a great presentation to our speakers. Thank you.
Yeah. Did I miss anybody that would like to say hello?
I see a few people. Mark Ensign, I see you on, so I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Hey, Katja. Yeah, my name's Mark Ensign. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer and the Chief Operating Officer at Chris Scott. I know Mark Gallagher and Mark Solomon very well because I work with Jennifer. But I've also been a mentor on 2 different cohorts at the MIT, which is now just the eForum. So a lot of fun. I really highly recommend doing it.
Thank you, Mark. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Elizabeth, do you want to introduce
Elizabeth,
yourself?
yes, I see Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Wexner Mata. I am with a law firm in El Paso, Texas. I actually teach a class at New Mexico State University in intellectual property for engineers and scientists. And in my former lifetime, I actually worked at Hamilton Brook for many, many years. So I am here to say how much I love them, and I'm delighted to see these kinds of programs and to be able to see all the faces.
Cool. Thanks for
It's
joining
nice
us.
to see you, Elizabeth.
I think I see Sudhakar. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a brand new mentee and enjoying this whole discussion, and really good to know how, especially Jennifer pointing out all the challenges and the complex things that she had to do. But I have been debating about whether we go in for a provisional patent and create a moat, or can we really defend? So this is all very good. I like the examples about brand building and the value, because I think that may give us some other kind of question. So this is really great learning. Appreciate all of this. Thank you.
Glad you're here. Call Mark, Deirdre, or Alex. Always work with people that are smarter than you.
Good tip.
I don't see anyone else with their camera on. If you do want to introduce yourself, speak now or forever hold your peace.
And if anybody has any questions for the speakers or anybody else, this is your chance.
Can I ask a question then?
Sure, go.
So if IP claims are so critical, are there good examples of IP claims versus bad examples that I can go on Google and look up, so I know how that is? Eventually we'll get to an attorney, but this is important for me to just frame my thinking.
Mark Solomon, I'm handing that to you.
Well, so there are there are a few issues. One, of course, so the patent claims that we've been able to get for Jennifer, we think they're good. Now I say we think they're good because they've obviously been granted as patents. There's a second step to the whole process, which is enforcing, right? So those patents that can sustain litigation are also deemed to be, good claims. So usually you need some examples. It's hard for somebody to, unless they've actually worked on the patent application, know the prior and to really direct, some examples. I could always connect with you and get you some examples. And there are some bad ones. So good ones are generally broad. The fewer words, generally the better, although you do potentially run into some issues, but generally better because nice broad claims, as we discussed earlier. Some bad claims might be those that have many, many words, may span a full page, a lot of elements, and the way you enforce claims in a patent sense is you have to have elements that read and their arrangement that read on some third party's product or services. So the fewer elements, the more likely that you're going to get infringement. The many more elements means that it gets very specific and it's easy for a third party to design around. That's a very technical answer to what you're asking. I feel like Mark Gallagher give a lot more, but it is hard to without some specificity. So fewer words that's been issued as a patent, generally good. And the more words you could consider generally bad. And specifics, I could always connect with you to provide you some examples.
Lovely. That'll be great. Thank you. Yes, that's kind of like the negotiation tips. Don't talk too much.
And for those of you who want to connect, please put your LinkedIn in the chat and we can connect with each other. Always helps.
And I see Eugene turned his video on and he's in Hawaii. So I'd love Eugene to introduce himself as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry, I was distracted. I was preparing for a gig that I have after this meeting. But I've been attending eForum meetings for a long time, and I just moved back to Hawaii in 2020. So thankfully, I can still do things remotely. But I've been doing mentoring here, and I'm trying to keep my mentoring on the East Coast going too.
Well, we appreciate you, Eugene. Thank you. And I'm jealous.
Yeah.
Of Hawaii. I think unless anybody has any more questions, we can wrap it up. I know we're a little bit over, but I want to make sure everybody had a chance to say hello. Please definitely make sure to put your LinkedIn in there. We will share the recording to those of you who are here. Might take us a few days because we do try to edit it just a little bit. And then, if anybody has any questions, let us know. You know where to find us. But again, I really want to thank Judy and Mark, other Mark Gallagher, Jennifer and Matt. I really appreciate your time and insights. It was super interesting. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Good
night.
Night.
Thank you.
First, I'm going to connect with people.